from the OG Living Studios in sunny South Florida via Nashville, Tennessee. Heard all over the world on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your streaming content. It's the Nashville Hype with your host, Paul King.
All the listeners all over the world, it's the Nashville Hype Podcast. I'm your host, Paul King. I have Amanda Colleen Williams. She's a hit songwriter in Nashville. She's had cuts by Garth Brooks, George Jones, and many others. She runs her own publishing company, and she just opened a new event center in town. It's a great conversation, so stick around. So, are you Nashville famous? Do you feel like you're Nashville famous?
Famous or infamous, I don't know which one.
But if you showed up at pretty much any music venue, people are going to know who you are, correct?
I mean, it's kind of strange to admit that, but yeah, pretty much. I can't go anywhere without knowing somebody in Nashville.
Yeah, the Williams name in music is country standard gold, really. And so I just wondered if the name itself opened doors, and whether or not the doors that were open were because of the name.
Well, you know, it's funny because I've had people that think that I'm Hank's daughter.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
And I think that, yeah, and I just look at them like, why? And I always correct them, you know.
Yeah.
You know, my daddy was Kim Williams, and they look like, who's that? Well, you need to go look him up.
Yeah, look him up and look him up fast, because I was reading that he was honored by the state of Tennessee, and it says, whereas during his lifetime, and even posthumously, Mr. Williams enjoyed more than 500 cuts. That just seems incredible.
It is. And, you know, my dad was so funny because he would make all these funny jokes about his injury, that I think that a lot of times people think that adversity keeps you from success. But from this perspective, and from my dad's, you know, he said that he never would have quit his day job and pursued that crazy, wild career as a songwriter if he had a, quote, normal life. And by that I mean, in 1974, my dad was burned on 60% of his body in an electrical fire at work. Mm-hmm. And he was disabled. He went home from work. I mean, went to the hospital, was in there for 6 months, thought he was going to die, etc. So when he started having his success finally as a songwriter, and it didn't happen overnight. You know, people think, oh, Kim Williams, he just was born with hit songs. No, he was burned, considered disabled by the government, you know, on Social Security and disability money. And that's what supported our family when I was a kid. And of course, he worked so hard because he was such a proud person, but also he had a great work ethic just from growing up hillbilly and East Tennessee, and hard work ethic and family, and he pursued that. So when people would say, oh man, you're on fire, which is a funny statement in the music industry, he'd laugh, or they'd say, man, you're hot, and he'd go, I've been hotter.
Yeah.
And it was just so irreverent, his jokes, but his humor is really what eventually brought him, I think, probably his greatest success, because he was so approachable by people, even though he might have been scary at first to look at for some people. But the name, I don't know that the name ever opened any doors for me, just people thinking Williams, just because there's so many Williamses that some of them are famous, some of them aren't. But I definitely know that being Kim Williams' daughter opens doors, just because they, you know, well, it's like my friend, one of my clients is a banker back in Tennessee, back in the old days of banking, and he said, you know, you can't do that anymore, but it used to be that if you gave a loan to somebody, it's their brother paid and their daddy paid and their mama paid and their uncle paid and their cousins paid, well, you can pretty much guarantee that guy's going to. And so I think that people look at me and think, well, Kim Williams was a genius songwriter and was awesome and had all the success, and maybe his daughter got a little bit of that. So I think that's probably my biggest foot in the door, at least at first. But you can't stay in there without talent. You've got to really work hard.
That is absolutely true, right? Yeah, I mean, you can leapfrog or feel like you can leapfrog into a situation, but if you can't quote unquote bring the heat, as you said, then you're not going to stick around. And so I was reading another place on your blog And this is AmandaColleenWilliams.com is where I'm reading these stories from. But you said you're a second-generation Garth Brooks songwriter. Does that mean or imply that your children are going to follow in your footsteps and possibly at some point become a third-generation Garth Brooks songwriter?
Well, gosh, I don't know. I think if you asked them right now, they probably wouldn't know. And honestly, if you'd asked me at their age, I probably wouldn't have known either. I tried to run every which way from this stuff, but
yeah,
I don't know. I want them to be free. I want them to have every opportunity in the world, but at the same time, it's like my dad impressed on me. I think some advice that he learned reading, I believe, Warren Buffett. It's you want to give them something, but you don't want to give them so much that they don't have to do anything.
Oh, right.
And for us, that was easy because a lot of people don't know, but the songwriting world just really got turned on its head about 20 years ago. And from this perspective, I've seen it really happen. It's the distribution models went from physical units, physical albums and tapes and CDs and all that to digital. Mm-hmm. And in that process, the way I can help people to see what happened to us is basically you take what you make, whatever it is, whether you get paid monthly, weekly, whatever it is, divide that by 91, and you see what happened to our money. Mm-hmm. And most people can't make it if you take their money and do that with it. And that's the case with songwriters here, professional songwriters that used to make their living at creating songs for the enjoyment of everyone. Right. They can't do that for a living anymore. They have to work at some other job or in an entrepreneurial way, if at best, if they're using their music. And or, that you could still do it if you work for a major publisher in some cases. However, everything's changed. It's not like they got it made over there. It's still a challenge industry-wide. So, for them, it was happening already when I got involved in songwriting. And my dad, he'd say, Mandy, now listen, this is a hard business. Mm-hmm. And if you can do anything else and be happy, do that.
Oh,
do
right.
not do this.
Right.
And of course, I just went full-fledged toward it. But really, it is part of my happiness, and it's part of my joy and bliss, and part of my gift that I guess partly inherited, but partly, if your dad is a trade and you see him studying it and practicing it and applying it, then that's what you do.
Do you take inspiration from just anywhere? Where do you get the inspiration for your songs? First question. And the second part is do you write every single day?
Yes, I do write every single day. Mm-hmm. I don't always write a song every day. I used to when I was first getting started as a professional writer. You really have to write daily to get good enough, fast enough to do this thing. However, inspiration comes from everywhere. Yeah. And really the difference between someone who's grinding it out on Music Row or New York or LA or somewhere that's a music center and they're getting paid, by a publisher to do this thing, it's a job. So you can't wait on inspiration to hit you. You have to learn how to dredge that up in yourself. Yeah. With varying degrees of success. And I've studied my own creative process. I honestly think early on it has to do with, as crazy as it sounds, with like moon cycles. I really noticed it used to be really tough for me to try to write a song around like the new moon time. I don't know why. It's just maybe psychological. I'd be sitting there thinking, I'm not writing, and I'd look down and I'd say, oh yeah, that's why. But it's probably an excuse, but in terms of that in nature, you look like W.C. Handy. He was a great composer, and he was inspired by nature sounds. So he'd listen to a bird call, and then maybe that would show up in some of his compositions, or even sounds that are around you in your natural environment or your man-made environment, maybe the train going by. That turns out one of Garth's recent records, they used a sample of a train. Midnight Train has an actual train sample in it. Oh, wow. And so you start thinking about, that, and then of course those are kind of abstract or natural, not necessarily like a lyric or something like that, but just an idea, something to get you started. And then on the lyrical side, sometimes you'll be having a conversation with somebody, and my dad would call it like a light bulb. You're talking, and then it can be just a mundane thing they say, but for some reason the context, it pops out to you. It sort of like stands out like a light bulb.
Right. That actually happened to me just in the past month. I heard the Bobby Bones show. He had guest, Kenny Chesney was a guest, and Kenny told a very mundane story that probably didn't stick out to anyone else but me. And I thought, wow, I've got to write that right now. And that song came in about 25 minutes, and then I spent the next month kind of redoing lines and everything.
Sure.
Which brings another question, actually. So I specifically wrote this song for Kenny Chesney. I've done that before in the past. I wrote a song for Vince Gill. I wrote a song for Reba.
Nice.
But those songs, they're not going to get cut by anyone else. They're specific to an artist. Do you write specific to an artist at times, or is it kind of, I'm going to write this song and see who likes it?
Well, first of all, what you said is exactly right, because the process of writing, it does come really fast a lot of the time. Like you said, you get into that flow, that idea. When it's a good idea, it's not just an idea for the song. It's actually the engine, really the emotional engine that makes it possible for you to finish it. Because a lot of times people will get halfway in and there's not enough steam or craft or whatever to finish. So you're right on with your process. And then what you're describing, we call, at Songwriters, we call that target writing. And you can target write not just to an artist like you're talking about, but maybe for a movie, film project, or to talk about a specific issue. If you write like a collection of songs talking about something that you're really passionate about. But generally, even if you're writing something for one of those top artists, you can't go wrong, because all of us are influenced by those artists that you mentioned, especially in country music, but pop too, because they had great catalog songs that they've made famous over the years, and some of them have written them, those songs. So if you're aiming for like Kenny, then there's Kenny, but then there's all these other artists that want to be Kenny.
Right.
And then you've got Reba, and then you've got everybody like me that wants to be Reba. And so you can take those songs, and especially if it's not like some detail of their life, that you've plucked out, you can always pitch those songs and get them cut. And then, what's funny, a lot of times people, they want to just, this song's written for Garth, or this song's written for Kenny, or somebody at the top of the A-list artists, and they're tough to get to. I mean, even for me, I've known Kenny since I was a kid, but it's tough for me to get to him always, because he's got all these other things going on. So if you're not getting a response back from somebody, or you're not able to get through, just flow on to the next down. I mean, I don't want to say down, because that guy that's wanting to be Kenny today, he might be his own supernova or superstar, next year.
Yeah, right.
So don't just say, well, he didn't cut it, so I'm going to throw it away. Definitely keep going, especially if it's a quality song.
Yeah.
Because, it's crazy. A lot of times we get these mixed messages, and it goes all the way through the music industry. You'll get mixed messages, partly because it's so subjective and everybody's got a way that works for them, partly because somebody's been told something before and now they're going to tell you, that,
right.
Call that playing on tapes,
Right.
Oh, you can't say but in this song. Oh, really? Well, I'm going to.
Yeah.
Really? And you hear that stuff all the time, even stuff like you can't repeat the same word from this to that. Well, I mean, I always love that example of Beyonce. I could have another you in a minute. Matter of fact, he'll be here in a minute. I mean, that's the same song two lines in a row, but
right.
It really works.
Right.
So
I had a meeting a long time ago at ASCAP. I've been a writer at ASCAP since 1994, I want to say. And I had a meeting with one of their top guys, and I played him a couple of songs, and the one I was really excited about, I thought, man, this is a really good song. And he listened to it, and he said, it repeats too much. You're never going to get anywhere with it. And I was like, okay, you know, I put it away, but I didn't put it down. Well, when I left the meeting, Amanda, I went down, I got in my truck, I turned on the radio, and Me and God was playing. And you know this, I think you know the song. It's Josh Turner, I believe. It's Me and God, and it just repeats and repeats, and you know, it says one thing, and then and Me and God, you know. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And you know, I thought I'm going to take people's advice and I'm going to listen, but I'm not going to stop, if that makes sense. And like the Reba, the Reba song that I wrote was right for Reba at the time that I wrote it. And I realized that it was never going to get cut by Reba, and now it's probably right for Carrie Underwood. It's probably perfect for Carrie Underwood, even though at the time it was written for Reba. And you did bring up something really interesting. Okay, so your father wrote, it says on this plaque here, 7,000 songs. And I've written probably hundreds, and I have about 4 good ones. Is that your experience, or what is your experience with writing a bunch and deciphering which one is good and which one is not so good?
Well, again, it's subjective. You know, at a certain point, you don't write any bad songs. Like, they may not be hits,
right?
But your craft is to the point where you're not writing something that's bad. It's not going to have, you know, some huge glaring problem with it. And the problem is that in the arts, especially over the last period of time, we've gotten to the point to where people don't even recognize there is such a thing as mastery skill with writing.
That's interesting. Yeah.
There absolutely is a thing as that. I watched it develop in my father. I've developed it in myself on purpose with, you know, tears and pain and blood and whatever else, you know, that it's like Roger Miller says, it's easy to write a song. You just stare at a blank piece of paper until drops of blood drop on your forehead. But there's truth to that, because it isn't just the words. It's all kinds of things. And it's something that, you know, here's the example you used to song, that the God song. It's like, you can pray for something. Like when I was a kid, I foolishly prayed for patience and wisdom. Like, I don't know where that came from, but don't do that, kids. Don't do that. You get the opportunity to exercise patience, because you can't just be like, oh, I'm patient now. Woo.
Right.
No, you're not. You're going to not be patient. I thought I could learn patience from cross stitching. The Lord gave me twins.
Oh,
you know?
Right.
It's like, you don't get to be a master songwriter by thinking you're one, or by just, you know, writing 1 or 2 songs. My dad went through that process, and his engine was, in a large part, his desire to prove to the world that this, as he would say, burned to a crisp, disabled, you know, former construction worker guy from East Tennessee could rise up to be one of the world's most renowned songwriters. And by God, he did.
Yeah, oh, he absolutely did.
And that's with willpower, you know. People say, oh, he's born with talent, he's this and that. I watched that man. He had talent, sure, but he worked and worked and worked and worked, and he had tons of songs that weren't hits. And you just look at that ratio, 7,000 songs.
Right.
And so, yeah, the numbers game, he would always say, songwriting is a numbers game. And some people will rebel against that. Oh, I'm going to just write 1 great song a month, and I'm not going to write. Well, good for you, but that's probably the hardest way you could go, because if you're tapping into the creative flow, then things come out very quickly, and then you have to have the skill to go back and revise, which is what sounds like your process is like.
Yeah.
And you can revise for a long period of time, but you have to learn that skill too. You can't unwrite your song. Sometimes you'll unwrite it if you get into that left brain too much, and you're like, oh, I repeated too much here, blah, blah, you know.
Right,
but
right.
When you start looking at the hits, and I'm not talking about modern hits, but I'm talking about through all time, even back into like the classical music hits, like the ones we still know today, like Beethoven's Für Elise and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Those things repeat. It's called a motif.
Yeah.
And it's nothing new. And you know what? Listen to the Beatles if you don't think we should repeat.
Right.
We've been studying, my Songpreneurs group, we started it really in 2010 as a way to help people to navigate this business, not just the business, but the craft of songwriting and all the things that go with it, and really looking at it in an entrepreneurial way.
Mm-hmm.
Because as the daughter of a successful songwriter who took our family off Social Security and disability and then rose to be one of the top songwriters, I have a heart for people who want to do this, who are called to do this. And it's not easy because, a lot of people that are in the business of helping songwriters, let's just face it, the economic downturn has forced a lot of people to seek money and sources of money elsewhere. So the scariest thing in the world when you're trying to provide help for somebody is to tell them something they don't want to hear, especially when you're dependent on their money.
Right.
But I've found that that's exactly what they need and what they want from their care providers, because at a certain stage we all need encouragement, and we always all do need encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to build a loving, trusting relationship with somebody who's a little further along, even if that person's younger than you, because they've spent more time at that craft than you maybe. Maybe you've been working a day job all your life and you hadn't had the 10,000 hours to sit and write yet.
Right.
That's perfectly fine. But if you want to get the 500 cuts like Kim Williams, then you might consider writing 7,000 songs like he did. You may not have, maybe you can write 5,000 and get 500 cuts. But it's a numbers game, and he would say it's a numbers game in every way, like who you're focusing your time with. Every year he would go back and do this yearly review.
Mm-hmm.
And he would look at, this guy's like my great friend. I love him. I've been spending a ton of time with him, but yet we're not getting any cuts. He's not pitching the songs. He won't call me back when I'm trying to get him to do this and that.
Oh, right.
Okay, well, I've got to spend, and here's this other guy. I spent 20% of my time with him, but we got 4 cuts.
Right.
So the following year, he'd still hang out with the 80% guy, but he would bring him back down and spend less time with him. And then the guy who's getting, he'd spent less time with but got more success, he would focus that 80% then on that.
Yeah.
It's the Pareto principle, he called. That's an accounting thing. My dad would pull those types of lessons from anywhere that they're found, and that's what we continue on today doing. Those ideas can come, but you don't ever know the benefit that you're going to get from pursuing something like songwriting.
Right.
I mean, everything from the fantastic, amazing, just quirky, unique people that you meet, which I think is probably the best thing about songwriters.
Yeah,
too. So funny, like
I've met
hilarious.
a bunch of them. I met a bunch of really, really quirky people when I was writing songs, and it's interesting. I was put together. I say I was put together. I actually called a very known artist back when. This is years ago. And we had talked forever about writing a song together. She was going to come up with a new album, and we were going to come up with a great song for this new album of hers. So I went over to her place in downtown Nashville. Because we knew each other so well and had been friends for so long, I kind of had the idea that this is going to go easy. It's going to be a simple write. And at that time, I was writing Grammy winners and Dove Award winners, a bunch of people with #1 songs and stuff. And so it was not uncommon to co-write with other people. But we couldn't get anything done. I mean, we worked for hours and hours and hours on this one idea. And it's almost like we just couldn't pop it off, in a sense. Like we couldn't find the essence of it, even though we worked really hard. Have you experienced that ever with a co-writer? I mean, I've done it. That's one example. There's been several times I've sat down with a co-writer and it not go well.
Yeah, it's tough, man, because it is kind of like a date,
All right.
And sometimes you put too much pressure on it. Like, sounds like you were all excited. I know you were, because, I mean, who wouldn't be? You get the opportunity to sit down with the artist.
You're right.
And you're going to write something for the record. And here you are, the writer, like, can't wait to have that opportunity. And you're putting all this pressure on yourself. And then she was too, sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
And here's number one that I've learned really the hard way, and I continue to learn this. It's not just in songwriting either. But never tell someone what you're going to do. Never. And the reason is because, first of all, it can put a lot of pressure on things. Second of all, in this business, it's such an up and down, a roller coaster,
right,
that you don't know, like, the slightest little, and I've been guilty of this. It'll seem like some nothing thing to you. Like, oh, I'm going to introduce you to Billy Block when you came over down here.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get down there, and Billy Block's like, he runs out the door before you get to introduce him to whoever, and then they're crushed.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah, it would have been a whole lot better if me and this artist had just got together for drinks, and then something popped off.
Right. And that's the thing, and that goes back to the thing about the idea. Sometimes it's that idea, it doesn't have, I would say, the gravitas or whatever, it's not enough of an engine. Like, you can have that's the thing about new writers too. And I'm not saying you're a new writer because you've done it for a while, but someone who's just getting a good idea. I was like this as a kid too. I'd try to find all these great ideas and tell Dad about it. That was most of what I would try to do. It's like, I wanted to please that my dad. I wanted to see that smile on his face, and if I could give him a song idea, mm-hmm, from some Harlequin romance I was reading or whatever, kiddie version, then that could be really good for him. He could be really excited about that. So I would try to do that all the time.
Right.
And half the time it would be, honestly, something he'd already written.
Oh,
or
interesting.
Maybe that's a Beatles song. What are you wasting my time with that? I didn't know. I was like a 8-9-year-old kid. So mm-hmm, the engine of the idea, it could be a great idea, but it has to be something that you and your co-writer can both get your heads into. And what happens is you almost share your mental wavelength with each other when you're on that certain level. And any amount of stress or strain can knock that out.
Right.
So where you're not on the same wavelength anymore. You're over here, they're over there, and the more tension and pressure you put on that situation, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
So like you said, it's absolutely best to just hang out, talk, don't put too much pressure on it. But yet at the end of the day, if you sit there with that intention and you got your craft together, but you're going to finish a song, unless someone is trying to, as Dad would say, swim upstream and kind of use that left brain too much, just try to build it like a house with here's this block and here's this block. That's not how creativity works.
Right.
Creativity works, it's more like a spiral. Here you get this line, and here's this line, this, and next thing, this whole big part will come out. And then you go back and you finesse it. That's where your craft comes in. Mm-hmm. But yeah, sure, I've sat, especially before I really had my craft in hand, mm-hmm, and I was like writing for major publishers. I just kind of got thrown into the fire. When I got signed to my first publishing deal was with Sony underneath the great and fantastic songwoman Donna Healy.
Oh, yeah.
And she encouraged me to be an artist at that time and thought that I was going to be. And I had my kids. They were, I think, less than 2 years old at that point. Mm-hmm. And she called me into a meeting before she even signed me there. And she had brought this woman in from LA who was one of their top executives. And I was so honored there to be, because nothing wrong with men. I love men. I love my dad. I love all his friends, my uncles, everybody. But it's just nice to be, especially when you're surrounded by all, it's like 90% male, this industry, or it was. I mean, even Berkeley, when I went there to Berkeley College of Music, it was 10% female in the 90s. And so you just get used to being around all these guys, and it's awesome. I love my bros. I love my guys. Mm-hmm. But there's something kind of cool about being championed by a woman, as a woman, especially as someone that's so successful. And
Right.
she brought me into that table. They had me play, and I kind of didn't really understand why. And then the lady says, well, we're thinking about you for an artist deal. And I looked them right smack in the face and I said, I'm not going to leave my twins. I'm not leaving the kids.
Oh, right.
So if that's part of the, and they kind of smiled and gave each other a knowing look. And then they said, and Donna said, well, I'm going to sign you to a country writing deal, Mandy. And I was like ecstatic, that was what I had wanted. So, you see these opportunities that come, and then you've got to choose what's right for you. And I think that sometimes people get, well, my husband just said this to somebody the other day I thought was really insightful. Right now, especially in this time, the opportunity comes before your mastery does.
Oh, that's
And I
interesting.
thought that was so insightful of him. And it happens all across everything now because it's so easy. You can take your song you think is so good and you put it out there, and then you just languish because you're like, well, nobody likes my song. I must not be good. Or you're trying to market something, or worse, you're spending, $2,000 to do a master on a song that's just really not that good of a song.
Right.
And you don't know that. And honestly, that's one of the biggest challenges of this business. Doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. You always think the last thing you wrote is the best thing.
Is the best thing that you have. Right. Yeah, there's no question about it. Have you ever, I know you do a lot of events and things. Have you ever found a writer through any of these events? And I'll tell a real quick story. I used to go to a lot of songwriter workshops, especially when I was first starting out in 1990 and 1991. And I got really, really blessed in the very beginning. I got myself a mentor. I had a mentor. But one of the things the mentor said is you need to go to songwriting workshops and things of that nature. And so fast forward many, many years, and I happened to be at one as a guest of someone else. And there was an artist, or there was a songwriter that I had seen in the years past, and she was still attending these workshops. And I walked over to her and I said, you should be on the other side of that table giving the advice at this point, because she was a fantastic songwriter. But she was attending to learn about the craft. You recommend that? Is that right? Or
Yeah, and honestly, you can learn from anybody. Even if it's what not to do. Oftentimes, and the reason that I think it's so powerful for writers to be part of a group. My dad was part of a group. In fact, some of his early breaks, I'd say his biggest break came from being part of this group here in Nashville called API. And they got all kinds of crud from people, like talking, oh, you shouldn't charge the writers. Yeah, you can't charge them. Well, honestly, you look at apprentice programs through the ages, that's what makes people stick with it.
You're
if
right.
you're giving people everything for free and they're not seeing the value and the benefit, they're going to just run around and not take it as seriously. Whereas if they are participating in a meaningful way, they're going to stick, they're going to do their work. It's motivation for some people. And honestly, Dad was put with his first co-writers through API, Johnny Slayton and Danny Morrison. They introduced him to Bob Montgomery, who was a great producer. Songman, his son Kevin, still in the business now today, doing a lot of things internationally. And, Bob championed that in a very early way, meaningfully took one of his songs, just had a fit over it. And it was a weird song. It still is a weird song. If the Devil Danced in Empty Pockets. Was Joe Diffie, number one. It was my dad's first number one in 1989. And, that was all a direct effect of my dad being part of that API group. And I met Wood Newton back in the day, going on some of these, Larry Henley. And it was so funny because those two guys, especially, I came across later in my career, and neither one of them remembered me as a child. Of course, I'm grown now. I don't look the same. But, I remembered them and the giving back of those guys, especially at that time in Nashville, and the contribution to a group. That's the reason that I built my groups.
Right.
And honestly, I didn't see this at the time, but I've come across a high-level music industry executive who really explained a lot to me about what happened in our industry, not just with the changing distribution model, but as a direct result, I think. And what he shared with me, I'll tell you without sharing who he was, but he was working at one of these top, very top music publishing houses right about that time, in about 2006, 2007, when Napster came out, reintroduced everybody to the way of getting music on the internet in 1999. And then at that same year, we started having a nosedive in our market share for how much value music brought into the economy. And what you see there is, at that same time, all of the industry went to a kind of protectionary approach, and they looked at their bottom line, and they had these experts come in and they looked at the balance sheets, and they saw, well, here's these guys, and I'll say guys because it was mostly guys at that time, men. They were making like $70,000, $80,000 a year, but they weren't artists. They were older. They weren't traveling. They maybe weren't even writing that many hits. So then they looked at this mid-tier group, and they were all new guys coming in, and they were making like $36,000 a year, and they were artists, writing with artists and having all the success. So any logical person says, well, let's cut these guys at the top and then keep these middle guys and let's champion them. Well, what they actually did was they gutted our industry of its mentors.
Oh, that's interesting.
They gutted them. And those guys ended up, now they work at, well, they moved. Most of them moved away, but some of them would be like working at Home Depot.
Right.
Especially Home Depot, because for some reason, that's where the songwriter can thrive. They provide them with benefits.
Right.
So that's where your songwriters were. I don't think most of them are still there because they said, go do something else now.
Right.
But you think about it that way. That's pretty insightful, and I think we can all see. And I'm not trying to diss these guys that have had all their hits these past years. There's some great songs on the radio. People try to trash the radio and stuff.
Right.
That's a specific skill set. That's an art in itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just when you think something's a ditty, you go and analyze it, and you tell me that's a ditty. It's not.
Yeah,
it's really
absolutely
tough to write something simple that way that's catchy. I mean, that's a huge talent. But at the same time, it doesn't diminish the fact that our ecosystem was completely upended by outside, in economics they call it externality. And it's still affecting us here.
Right. Yeah. Do you believe in a sense that it's going to get better or worse?
It must get better. And the reason I say that is because there's enough of us left that know what it is to make our living from this and that have our mastery skill set in hand. That, we're all past the angry point now. We were real angry. And I say we, it's not like my group, Songwriters. I'm talking about the people who used to make a living and now have to go and do everything but write to make it go with their families.
Right.
But, it was like really like, we're angry, we're against this, whatever. You maybe kept her quiet about it, but still, you tried dealing with, you put those shoes on and walk in them, and you tell me you're not a little pinched, right?
Right.
So, but now it's funny, like because we've all figured out how to make a living, and we're waiting on, whatever opportunities are available. We're seeing the industry change. We're all just sort of looking at the royalty, mechanisms as they're churning along and figuring out how that's going to work. But one of my friends that works at the Department of State, I work as an arts envoy through the U.S. Department of State and Cultural Affairs Office through the Department of Education. And that's just one of the things that I've branched off and done, which I wouldn't have probably ever done that if I had my regular songwriting going all the time. But of course it definitely plays in. But this guy was like, well, we got to do better about we got to do better for you songwriters. And I just started laughing. And I was laughing. He's like, what? And I was like, why don't you try saving the dinosaurs?
Yo, man, that's fun. Yeah.
But honestly, no, it's not funny, because the reason is the artistic values that are put on display by a creative professional cannot be paralleled by any other form. We as humans, it's by definition, we've got our mundane lives that our drudgery, our daily whatever, we're immersed in all this stuff.
Right.
Here in this beautiful planet of ours. But there's a lot of problems, tons of problems daily. The job, the duty of the artist is to uplift. And to uplift humanity in a way that we can see above our problems. It's like Einstein said, you don't find the solution to these problems at the level of the problem. You have to transcend. You rise above. You look at it from a higher perspective. That is the duty of art. And that's what art can do. You can convey so much with so few words, with so few images. One picture, the cliche, a picture says 1,000 words.
Right.
A picture can cut through all the words. A picture doesn't need words to convey to you some kind of a truth. And sometimes when we're so caught up in the grind and the churn of our mundane lives, we forget that music and art, those artistic values are in some ways a pathway to our salvation.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about, not necessarily salvation, but one of the songs that we have on rotation on the Nashville Hype is Jesus Loves Me. And I know your father wrote 3 Wooden Crosses and several other songs about Jesus. And I just wanted to ask how big impact faith has on your life.
Oh, 100%. And it's not the kind of faith that most people, when I'm, talking about a Bible thumper or whatever, I don't think that faith is well understood these days because it can be so fanatical in its application. But my dad, it's kind of funny that you asked that, because he grew up in a family that didn't go to church. In fact, my grandpa, my dad's dad, was self-proclaimed atheist.
Okay.
And growing up there with that one foot in that type of world, and then on my mom's side, total churchgoers every Sunday, my uncle's a preacher, all that stuff.
Right.
And to me, both of those groups of people had an incredible faith that it seems like they'd be at odds and at war with each other, but because of the constant reflection upon what they didn't believe in
right.
on my dad's side, obviously they did, or they wouldn't have been so tormented over it. And then on mom's side, that constant reflection over what they thought they believed in and maybe didn't always reflect.
Right.
It was such an interesting fertile ground for me as a child to develop my own type of faith. And really, it might sound crazy, but I was a little only child growing up in the woods where my daddy and mama were constantly taking care of my dad's health issues.
Right.
And he may not live the next day. I sat on my dad's deathbed, my whole childhood.
Yeah.
He died literally multiple times. It's very traumatic.
Right.
For a child who adores her father. He was my life.
Mm-hmm.
And he died. So I got a lot of practice, I'll put it that way. But,
oh, wow.
I spent my days in the woods with Jesus. And I'll just tell you right there.
Yeah.
He was with me. He was holding my hand. He was right there with me. He was my best friend. And as I got older, I questioned, I guess, the prodigal son or whatever, wasting the opportunities. And the more I questioned, the more he held firm with me. And I don't know that I can really explain the depth of my faith. But my dad and I, we shared conversations about faith. We shared our questions and our observations and things like that. But I think that anybody who's a creative person has their own idea of what faith and spirituality and religion contributes to their artistic output.
Right.
And yeah, so for me, our faith, it definitely, and in writing, my dad writing Three Wooden Crosses, I asked those two guys, my dad and Doug Johnson, about that process as part of studying songcraft. And those guys are such masters that they didn't even consciously, intellectually think about what was going to unfold in that song. They just hopped on that bus and saw where it went.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the beauty that can happen when you apply both of those aspects of ourselves, that intellect and then that intuition, and then letting everything kind of come together. And then for Jesus Loves Me, some people might think it's like too much, because it kind of pokes fun at a materialistic viewpoint of Christianity.
Yeah, I love it. It's the whole reason Jesus loves you, except for that. He
bought me a car in a big old closet with a guitar in it,
Right. It's, you look around and you're like, oh, Jesus loves me because I have all of this. But you really turn it around on the third verse, and people can hear it on the Nashville Hype, what it really is about.
And it's funny, but it's true. Like, some people, I went to churches where people were down on their knees crying and praying over, Lord, give me a new car.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was kind of cracking up over that. And
yeah.
So I thought, well, that's so. But you know what? If they're using that car to do service work, that they really do need that car, then is it really materialistic? I don't know.
Right.
I'm not here to judge somebody on that.
Yeah, that's it sounds like you pretty level-headed when it comes to things like that, because I was raised in churches where people would do the same thing, and God give me, God give me, God give me, and you can't really judge in a sense, and you gotta live kind of your own life or your own path, or do the best that you can, I guess. So let me ask real quick, because we're coming up on the hour. The 7695, is that still the wooded area that you go out and talk to Jesus in?
Well, sure, yeah. Well, Jesus is everywhere,
Right.
But yeah, the 7695 is really beautiful. It's a private event space that is actually amazing. When I went through cancer, I had breast cancer. Actually, we homeschooled my twins up through the 8th grade, and my whole plan all along was to go work on my music and tour some while they went then on to public high school.
Mm-hmm.
So that for the social stuff. Well, the day they started high school was the day I found out that I had cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was going through all those treatments and driving past this place every day on the way there on River Road in Nashville. And the challenge has been, I run songpreneurs and my publishing houses out of a place that has basically no internet. There's no internet access here.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of common in a lot of rural or areas in Tennessee, especially with our beautiful woodlands and things.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so it was a huge challenge because I had to go, and so we passed by this place every day, and it was abandoned. It had this for rent sign in the window, and every day. And I thought, I know they get internet here, and here's this place is sitting empty. It's been empty 2 years, and I told my partner, I was like, we gotta check on this. And he's like, we can't afford this right now. We're going. I was like, I might die. I was like, let's just check it out. So we did. The place is it's a family land of this beautiful family called the Pickneys.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many here in Tennessee. They're one of the oldest established families here in Tennessee. And they have this family land. And it had been bars, and it used to be a place called Norm's River Roadhouse, which is cool. But now, basically, as during my cancer recovery, my partner and our kids fixed the place up, like literally rehabilitated that land using shovels.
Oh, wow.
And like serious long-term every day. We pick up 13 miles of road frontage of litter.
Oh, wow.
Still to this day.
Wow.
And it's just a labor of love. And we do. We haven't advertised the place yet, but we've had a few events there. It's for weddings and graduation parties and things like that. But we also I do my events there. So we've got my 12th annual Nashville Songwriting and Music Business Conference coming up at the end of June.
Mm-hmm.
And fantastic. I haven't announced it yet, but I'll announce it here on Nashville Hype. I've got Mr. George Gruen of Gruen Guitars is going to be our keynote interview on the last day of the conference. So I'm so excited about that. But yeah, it is a place that you can, rent out for your event or come to one of ours that we do. We also do concerts there, so you can check that out, 7695.us.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a beautiful, peaceful, calm place to be and to be with other people. So yeah,
I'm looking at it on the internet. I'm looking at all the pictures of the weddings and just the grounds itself, and it seems like it would be a very peaceful place. And it's also the place that you're going to do. You've got a one-woman show, is that correct? That you're going to perform out there?
Yeah. I've been doing that thing for a while. I just during my treatments, actually before I got sick, I think probably about 2012 or something like that. My partner, again, is very creative, very insightful, and of course not a musician, which is a big blessing too.
Yeah.
To me, but he's like, you got all these songs, and why don't you try to take them all, look at what you got, and then make a story of them, kind of put something between them, make a story, a bigger story of the song. I thought, that's a cool challenge.
Yeah.
So one day I was sitting in there in my office and I started thinking how it would go, and it just kind of fell out of the air on me. I have to be grateful for that help and getting that thing down, but it was all songs that I had already written.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are in my Sony catalog, some of them are in other catalogs that I have, some of them are in my catalogs, but they all work together to create this little 35-minute set. It's called The Story of Love through music and poetry, and it takes people on a journey. I've gotten some great reviews. In fact, my friend Patty Williams here in Nashville nominated me for Artist of the Year.
Oh, wow.
In this Nashville Independent Music Awards in 2017, which was so huge for me because, I was through cancer. I was still going through it. Nobody knew, really. I didn't tell anybody until it was over. But 2015, 2016, I lost my dad, just really tough. And then 2017, I won Artist of the Year for that show. And, that really gave me a boost. It's funny, I always kind of rail against contests and things. I'm like, don't always enter a contest. You got to work. But sometimes you got to enter those contests. And if you win it, especially, it can really give you, not necessarily maybe always a boost in everybody else's eyes, but sometimes you just need that confidence in your heart and yourself.
Right.
I got to really thank them and Patty for putting me up there on that. But yeah, The Story of Love is... The goal is to get that out now that we're ready to tour, get it out there and let everybody see it out on the road, because it's pretty cool. I just got to be really proud of that thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I listen to your CDs and your music, you definitely have an acting background, it seems, because every song is acted as it's performed, or at least it sounds. Jesus Loves Me is totally different. Is totally different and has a different. You've got a more sultry feel on Just Need a Man, which also plays here on the Nashville Hype. Is that on purpose?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, when I was a kid, I was Sagebrush Sal and Clay and stuff. But, I think I had a friend, David Glick, who's a great artist here. He painted the dragon on the side of Elcourt Tapas. So a great visual artist. Mm-hmm. And he told me, and I guess I was in high school, he said, because I was feeling like a fraud, because I'd get up there on stage and I'd be trying to play my songs, and then I'd feel like, well, I'm not being authentic to myself. I've got to be my sulky, brooding self up here. But actually, he kind of took me aside and he said, you know what? You got to think of it like acting. Mm-hmm. It's just an act. It's an act, and you're being an entertainer. It's not you. Yeah, you put the songs together, it's you singing, but it's not about you. You got to get out of that, because it's going to tear you down.
Oh, right.
And I thought, you know what? Yeah. And I just kind of embraced that philosophy, and it's really helped me, because I think that's important for any artist and writer. It is an act, because it's helpful to recognize these different facets of oneself. Because if you're putting your heart and soul as a writer up there as you're entertaining, that's not really the place for that always. Sometimes they're there to laugh, to cry, to dance. It's your job to be the vehicle for that at that time, rather than the vehicle that brought it into the world in the first place. So it's a lot of like compartmentalization, separation, and the acting brain, thinking of it as an act and an entertaining thing, is really a healthy way to look at this business, because otherwise you're constantly taking daggers right straight to your heart.
Oh yeah.
You can only live so long doing that.
It is a tough business. There's no question about it. Well, we've been talking to Amanda Colleen Williams here on the Nashville HIT podcast, and I just want to say thank you so much for your time today and for blessing us with such great music.
Well, I appreciate you, Paul. Thank you so much for having me on the Nashville HIT.